The silence in the throne room was heavier than the vacuum of space. General Krathex, a veteran of 17 integration campaigns, stood motionless before the Imperial Council, his grayish-green scales reflecting the bluish light of the suspended holograms. He had faced plasma storms on Kepler 442, navigated asteroid fields in Alpha Centauri, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Emperor Jakir, enormous even by the standards of his reptilian species, leaned forward on the black crystal throne. His three mandibles opened in a gesture of impatience. "General, you interrupted a strategic planning session to report an encounter with a single, primitive vessel? Explain yourself." Krathex took a deep breath, activating the neural projector implanted in his cortex. Three-dimensional images flooded the hall, a small cylindrical ship, built with antiquated metal alloys, chemical thrusters still visible on its rear section. It was pathetic compared to the Imperial vessels, which glided through space-time with fifth-generation warp drives. "Sire, this is the ISS Pathfinder, an exploration vessel belonging to the species that calls itself human. We encountered this craft in Sector 7 Gamma, near the third planet of an unprioritized system." Admiral Vextor, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet, emitted a sibilant sound that, among his species, signified disdain. "A chemical combustion-powered exploration vessel? General, you wasted time and resources tracking space junk?" "I thought the same, Admiral." Krathex zoomed in on the image, revealing burn marks on the Pathfinder's hull. "Until it opened fire on my squadron." A murmur ran through the council members. The general continued, his voice steady, despite the incredulity he knew he was provoking. 6 of my reconnaissance fighters were destroyed before we managed to neutralize its propulsion systems. The ship was armed with kinetic projectiles, primitive nuclear missiles, and something they called a railgun. Vextor slammed his claws against the console in front of him. "Kinetic weapons? They still use physical mass as armament? That is second-cycle technology. Any cadet would know how to evade subsonic projectiles." "I believe that too, Admiral. But they weren't shooting to hit. They were shooting to force maneuvers, to push our ships toward debris fields they had previously mapped. We lost 2 fighters because their pilots were forced into an asteroid belt." Krathex changed the projection. Now, the hall saw the interior of the Pathfinder, captured by the boarding team's cameras. There were only 3 crew members, all belonging to the same species, scaleless bipeds, exposed pinkish skin, without any natural protective carapace. They looked fragile, almost ridiculous in their makeshift pressurized suits. "I ordered the boarding as soon as the ship was incapacitated. We expected immediate surrender. The crew was wounded, low on oxygen, and completely surrounded by 12 of our best soldiers." The general paused, his nictitating membranes blinking rapidly, a sign of stress among his species. Instead of surrendering, they attacked. "With what weapons?" asked a counselor, her dorsal crests bristling with curiosity. "With their bare hands, Counselor. One of them, whom we later identified as Commander John Miller, had taken 3 energy blasts. His biometric records showed critical damage to vital organs. He should have been dead, or, at the very least, unconscious." Krathex zoomed in on the recording. The image showed the human advancing against 2 Imperial soldiers, each 3 times his body mass. He moved erratically, as if feeling no pain, his eyes fixed on his adversaries with a disturbing intensity. "He killed 2 of my soldiers before finally succumbing to his injuries. In subsequent medical reports, we discovered that his body was flooded with a chemical substance they call adrenaline. This substance suppresses pain, temporarily increases muscle strength, and allows them to continue functioning even with damage that would incapacitate any other known species. Silence returned to the hall. The Emperor rose, his 10-foot height, casting a shadow over the general. "You are telling me you lost 8 ships and 2 soldiers to 3 dying primitives?" "Yes, sire, and I discovered something even more disturbing when interrogating the 2 survivors." Krathex activated an audio recording. The voice was guttural, filled with an emotion that the universal translators identified as defiance. "You made a mistake finding us. We are not like the other species you've encountered. We will not surrender. We will not retreat. And if you come to our world, you will find that every human living there is willing to die to protect it." It was engineer Sarah Chen, whose medical records showed a broken arm and 3 fractured ribs. She had spoken these words while receiving treatment, showing no fear or pain. "I accessed their databases during the interrogation." Krathex continued. "This species has a 10,000-year history of internal conflict. They have warred among themselves, using chemical, nuclear, and biological weapons. They created concepts like mutually assured destruction. They developed guerrilla tactics so efficient that a numerically inferior force can paralyze entire armies. They don't just know war, sire. They have perfected it." Admiral Vextor stood up, his scales acquiring a reddish tone of irritation. "With all due respect, General, you are allowing a traumatic encounter to cloud your strategic judgment. This human species possesses primitive ships, antiquated weapons, and no energy shields. They are talented barbarians, I admit, but they remain primitives. The Empire has already integrated 427 civilizations. Some resisted. All eventually understood the futility of fighting us. This one is different, Admiral. They all say that." Krathex looked directly at the Emperor, a gesture of audacity that made several counselors recoil. "Sire, I implore you, classify this system as a quarantine zone. It is not worth the cost of integrating them. They possess few strategic resources. Their technology is irrelevant by our standards, and the resistance they will offer will cost more lives than any benefit we might gain." The Emperor remained silent for long seconds. Then, his mandibles opened in what could be interpreted as a smile. "General Krathex, you have served the Empire with distinction for 7 decades, but fear has no place in our strategic decisions. The sector this human species inhabits lies on a vital transit route for our trade routes with the outer worlds. We need this system." He gestured to Admiral Vextor. "Admiral, you are authorized to mobilize the 3rd Fleet. 500 ships should be more than sufficient for a standard integration mission. Offer peaceful surrender first, as per protocol. If they refuse, demonstrate Imperial superiority unequivocally. I want this system catalogued and its inhabitants integrated within 6 cycles." Vextor struck his fist against his chest in a military salute. "It will be an honor, my Emperor. These primitives will quickly learn what it means to challenge the Empire." Krathex remained motionless as the council dispersed, discussing supply routes and occupation timelines. No one paid attention to the old general anymore. He looked one last time at the frozen image of Commander John Miller, those human eyes still burning with defiance even in death. In his 62 years of service, Krathex had learned to recognize when he was facing a predator. And for the first time in his career, he felt that his empire had chosen to hunt something far more dangerous than they imagined. He left the hall, in silence, carrying the weight of an ignored warning. 6 months later, the Imperial Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, its 500 ships materializing in a perfectly coordinated formation. At the center of the fleet, the flagship Star Dominator shone like a black jewel against the vacuum, its 3-mile length carrying enough armament to vitrify an entire planet. In the command center, Admiral Vextor watched the 3-dimensional holograms mapping the system in real time. 8 planets orbiting a medium yellow star. Nothing special, except for the 3rd planet. That blue and white world the humans called Earth. "Sensor report," he ordered, his claws drumming impatiently on the command console. The sensor officer, a young reptilian with scales still bright with youth, leaned over his instruments. "Admiral, we detect significant activity on the 3rd planet and several moons of the gas giants. We confirm the presence of orbital stations, communication satellites, and what appear to be early-stage colonies on the 4th planet and one of the 5th planet's moons." "Defenses?" "Primitive, sire. We detect approximately 200 vessels of various sizes. Most appear to be transport or exploration. We identify perhaps 40 ships that possess armament." Vextor emitted that sibilant sound of satisfaction. 40 ships against 500. It won't even be a battle worthy of recording in the Imperial annals. He activated the long-range communication channel, adjusting his voice to the diplomatic standard the Empire used in first contacts. "Attention, inhabitants of the system designated Sol 3. I am Admiral Vextor of the Imperial Third Fleet. You have been identified as an emerging species occupying a sector of strategic interest to the Galactic Empire. Under the integration protocols established by the Centaurus Accord, we offer a choice: accept Imperial sovereignty peacefully and become protected members of the Empire, or resist and face the consequences of challenging a millennia-old civilization." For long seconds, only static filled the channel. Then, a human voice responded, speaking in a language that the universal translators quickly processed. "Admiral Vextor, this is Admiral Rebecca Zhang, Commander of the Unified Earth Defense Fleet. On behalf of humanity, we reject your offer." Vextor blinked his nictitating membranes, genuinely surprised. "Admiral Zhang, do you understand what you are saying? My fleet has a numerical superiority of more than 10 to 1. Our weapons are centuries more advanced than anything your species can produce. This is not a negotiation. It is an offer of clemency." "We understand perfectly, Admiral, and our answer remains the same. Earth will not surrender, not today, not tomorrow, not ever." There was a pause, and when the human voice returned, it carried something the translators identified as a complex emotion, mixing sadness and determination. "You had a chance to leave us alone. Now, you will have to conquer us, and I can guarantee, Admiral, that it will be much more costly than you imagine." The channel closed abruptly. Vextor remained staring at the hologram of the blue planet, processing that incomprehensible rejection. "Admiral," the communications officer called his attention, "we are detecting massive transmissions between all human installations. They appear to be evacuating civilians from the orbital stations." "Cowards," Vextor muttered. At least they have enough sense to protect non-combatants. But the sensor officer interrupted him, his voice tense. Sire, something is wrong. The stations are not just being evacuated, they are being reconfigured. Vextor zoomed in on the image of the largest human orbital station, a rotating cylindrical structure orbiting one of Jupiter's moons. Small evacuation vessels were moving away from it in all directions, but the station itself was changing its orbit, its primitive chemical thrusters burning at maximum power. Where is it going? The answer came 30 seconds later when the orbital station collided directly with one of the Imperial destroyers that had positioned itself near the moon. The explosion illuminated the system for brief moments, instantly vaporizing both structures. The silence in the command center was absolute. They used an entire civilian station as a projectile. The sensor officer whispered, his scales losing color. Vextor felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Uncertainty. All ships, shields to maximum. Defensive delta formation. I want all sensors tracking every moving object in this system. But the humans were already moving. From the asteroid belt, between the 4th and 5th planets, hundreds of heat signatures emerged. They were not manned ships, the sensors quickly identified, but automated drones, each carrying a primitive nuclear warhead. Point defenses, Vextor ordered. Destroy all missiles before they reach the formation. The Imperial ships responded with mechanical precision. High-energy lasers and plasma cannons swept through space, destroying the drones by the dozens. It was basic technology, easily neutralized, but there were so many of them. And while the Imperial fleet was busy defending itself from the drones, 40 human ships emerged from behind the Earth's moon, their trajectories calculated to exploit the blind spots created by the defensive formation. Enemy contact, Sector 4. They are the human combat vessels. Vextor watched as the primitive human craft advanced. They did not attempt sophisticated evasive maneuvers. They possessed no energy shields to protect them. They simply accelerated directly toward the Imperial fleet, firing their kinetic weapons and missiles in sequences calculated to overload the defense systems. 2 enemy ships destroyed, 4, 7. The numbers increased rapidly. The human ships were fragile, their metallic hulls shattering under Imperial plasma fire. But for every ship destroyed, another took its place, and they kept advancing. Sire, the combat vessel UNS Valiant is on a collision course with the Star Lance cruiser. Vextor zoomed in on the image. The Valiant was a wreck. Atmosphere leaking from multiple perforations, half of its engines offline. It should have been retreating, trying to save the crew. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the Imperial cruiser. Destroy that ship, now! The plasma cannons fired, but the Valiant was already too close, moving too fast. It collided with the Star Lance at sublight speed. The kinetic force of the impact penetrating the weakened Imperial shields and tearing through the cruiser's hull. Both ships disintegrated in a fireball that could be seen from anywhere in the system. Damage report, Vextor roared, his claws piercing the console. We lost 5 ships, Admiral. Another 12 report significant damage. Human forces have been reduced to 17 vessels. Then we are winning. Yes, sire, but the cost is above projections, far above. Vextor looked at the blue planet, shining innocently on the sensors. In any standard integration, the native species would recognize the futility of resistance at this point. They would negotiate, try to save what they could. But the 17 remaining human ships did not retreat. They reorganized their formation, used the wreckage of their own ships as cover, and continued attacking. Admiral Zhang, Vextor opened the communication channel again. Your forces have been decimated. You have lost more than half your fleet. Surrender now, and I will spare your planet from orbital devastation. The human's response came after a long pause, and her voice carried a deep weariness, but absolutely no regret. Admiral Vextor, you destroyed 17 of our ships. We destroyed 5 of yours. In purely numerical terms, you are winning. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something dangerous in her tone. But you lost 5 ships facing primitives, using chemical and kinetic weapons. How many more are you willing to lose? Because I can guarantee that every inch of this system will cost Imperial blood. Every moon, every station, every city on Earth. If you want this system, Admiral, you will have to pay for it with a pile of wreckage so high it reaches the stars. Vextor cut the channel, his mind processing tactical calculations. He still had overwhelming superiority. He could still win. But for the first time in his career, facing primitives did not feel like a guaranteed victory. It felt like the beginning of a nightmare. 3 weeks later, the Imperial Third Fleet finally controlled the orbital space around Earth. The price had been brutal. 93 ships destroyed, another 47 damaged, seriously enough to require return to Imperial shipyards. The human fleet had been completely annihilated, but it had taken 20% of the invading force with it. Vextor looked at the blue planet through the Star Dominator's observation window. It should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, he felt a growing weight in his chest. Status of the ground occupation, he ordered, returning to the command center. The ground operations officer, an older reptilian with scars from 3 previous wars, touched his console and holograms of the Earth's surface appeared. Sire, the major cities are empty. San Francisco, New York, Tokyo, London, all evacuated. We estimate that 90% of the human population has moved into underground complexes. Then we will force them out. Precision bombing on the entry points. We have tried, Admiral. They reinforce the structures with miles of rock and concrete. Our scanners can barely penetrate. We would have to vitrify entire continents to reach them, and that would violate all integration protocols. Vextor hissed in frustration. The Empire had strict rules about planetary genocide. Integrated species needed to survive to be useful. Dead planets paid no tribute. Then we send ground troops. We will enter the complexes and force their surrender. That was how, for the first time in a century, Imperial soldiers stepped onto hostile territory without the guarantee of a quick victory. Commander Scarver led the 100th Assault Legion, 1,000 of the Empire's best soldiers. She had participated in 17 integrations, facing everything from aquatic worlds to insectoid hives. But as her troop descended through the upper layers of the human underground complexes, something felt profoundly wrong. The corridors were too narrow for their combat armor to maneuver comfortably. The lighting was dim, designed for human eyes, forcing her soldiers to rely on infrared visors. And everything was too silent. Squadron 3, report, she commanded, through the neural communicator, static. Squadron 3, respond. A scream cut through the channel, followed by the sounds of energy weapon fire. Then, silence again. All squadrons, defensive formation. We have hostile contact. Scarver activated her motion sensors. Nothing. The corridors ahead seemed completely empty. She advanced carefully, her plasma rifle charged, followed by 20 soldiers in tight combat formation. They found Squadron 3-2 levels down, or rather, they found what was left of them. 8 Imperial soldiers were down, precise perforations in their armor where the pressure seals were weakest. There were no signs of prolonged struggle, just efficient, silent death. "Sniper," Scarver muttered, analyzing the firing angles. A single shooter eliminated an entire squadron. But how? The sensors showed nothing. Humans did not possess stealth technology. The answer came when she noticed the small ventilation openings in the ceiling. Space is too narrow for an Imperial soldier, but perfectly suited for smaller, more agile humans. They are in the walls, she realized. Too late. The ambush was brutal and precise. Humans emerged from ventilation ducts, hidden passages and false doors. They did not wear heavy armor like the Imperial soldiers. They wore dark clothing, carried primitive, solid projectile weapons, and moved like shadows. Plasma fire illuminated the corridors, but the humans were no longer where the sensors indicated. They used the environment, knew every corridor, every hiding place. For every human, the Imperials shot. Down, 2 more appeared. Scarver ordered a retreat, but the humans had sealed the escape routes. Improvised bombs, force fields stolen from fallen Imperial equipment, even piled wreckage created deadly labyrinths. When rescue finally arrived 6 hours later, the 100th Legion had lost 240 soldiers. The humans left behind 23 bodies. In the Star Dominator's command center, Vextor received similar reports from all ground insertion points. Imperial troops were being massacred in underground urban combat. "How is this possible?" he roared, his claws slamming against the console. "We have superior armor, superior weapons, superior training." The intelligence officer, who had spent the last few weeks studying the captured human databases, approached hesitantly. "Admiral, I believe I have found the answer." He projected images of historical human conflicts, ruined cities, human soldiers fighting among debris, urban guerrilla tactics developed over millennia. Humans possess 10,000 years of recorded history of warfare. And during that period, they did not just fight other species, they fought themselves. They developed tactics specifically to combat technologically superior forces. More images: Vietnam, Afghanistan, Stalingrad, Warsaw. Cities where smaller forces had turned urban environments into tactical nightmares. They call this asymmetric warfare, Admiral. When facing a stronger enemy, they do not fight conventionally. They turn the environment itself into a weapon. Every corridor becomes a kill zone. Every room, a potential trap. Vextor watched the images with growing horror. And the civilians, the non-combatants? "There is no clear distinction, sire. We detect resistance coming from all demographic groups. We identified humans over 70 Earth years old operating weapons, young humans, some under 15, acting as messengers and observers. This is a violation of all civilized conventions of war." The intelligence officer blinked his nictitating membranes. "Humans have conventions of war, Admiral. They simply do not apply to invaders who attacked first. In the databases, we found a concept they call total defense. When the home itself is threatened, every citizen becomes a potential combatant." Vextor sat heavily in his command chair. He had won the battle for orbital space. He controlled the skies of Earth, but the planet below him was an infinite labyrinth of corridors, tunnels, and complexes where his technological superiority meant less and less. An open transmission arrived from one of the complexes. Vextor accepted it, expecting an offer of surrender. Instead, he saw the face of an older human woman, grey hair, tired but determined eyes. She spoke directly to the camera. "Admiral Vextor, my name is Dr. Elena Kovac. I am 68 Earth years old and spent most of my life as a doctor, healing people. Now, I have learned to use a rifle." She showed the primitive weapon she held. "I transmit this message on behalf of billions of humans living in these complexes. You may have conquered our sky. You may have destroyed our ships. But you will never conquer our home. Every meter you advance will cost Imperial lives. Every corridor you try to take will, be defended until the last human." Her voice remained calm, almost gentle, but the words carried the weight of an absolute promise. "We are willing to negotiate a truce. Withdraw your forces from the solar system, recognize our sovereignty and never return, or continue this war and discover that humanity can lose battles but will never stop fighting." The transmission ended, leaving Vextor staring at a blank screen. 6 months. 6 Earth months of stagnant occupation. His soldiers controlled perhaps 10% of the underground complexes. The rest remained in human hands, and each day brought more Imperial casualties. The Admiral looked at the stars through the observation window, remembering General Krathex's words. He had conquered the system, but the victory felt increasingly hollow. Commander Marcus Rivera pulled the circuit board from the destroyed Imperial ship, his gloved hands working quickly in the vacuum of space. Around him, 6 other humans in makeshift spacesuits meticulously dismantled the wreckage of an Imperial fighter that had been shot down 3 weeks earlier. "Got the navigation module," he announced through the communicator, his voice distorted but understandable. "It's damaged, but Engineer Chen should be able to extract the warp algorithms." "Great job, Marcus. Heading back to the asteroid," replied the voice of Captain Elizabeth Torres, commander of Omega Facility, the secret human base hidden in the asteroid belt. Omega Facility was one of 12 bases humanity had secretly built during the first months of the occupation. Excavated inside large asteroids protected by layers of rock that blocked Imperial sensors, these facilities served as shipyards, research centers, and military bases. Marcus crossed the airlock and removed his helmet, breathing deeply the recycled air of the station. In front of him, the facility's main hangar revealed a secret that would change the entire war. 20 hybrid spacecraft, combining human structures with captured Imperial technology. Engineer Sarah Chen, who had been one of the survivors of the first encounter with the Imperial fleet, supervised the construction with the precision of a maestro. Her hair was grayer now, her face marked by months of incessant work, but her eyes shone with fierce determination. Navigation module, finally. She smiled as she received the component from Marcus's hands. "With this, we can complete the warp systems of the last 5 ships." "Will they work?" Marcus asked, observing the hybrid vessels. They were strange, a fusion of human pragmatism with alien elegance. "They'll have to work, because in 2 weeks, we're taking the war to them." In the facility's command room, Admiral Rebecca Zhang studied holographic maps of Imperial space. Around her, humanity's best military strategists debated potential targets. The Empire controls 37 systems in the sector near Earth, explained General James Patterson, a veteran of 3 terrestrial wars before the invasion. Our spies managed to get information on supply routes, garrisons, and weak points. Spies? Zhang raised an eyebrow. We managed to infiltrate agents into Imperial territory? We don't need to. The Imperials constantly capture humans for interrogation. What they don't realize is that some of the captured are volunteers, carrying false information while memorizing everything they see and hear. Patterson zoomed in on the image of a specific star system. This is the Kepler 442 system, an agricultural world that provides 60% of the food supplies for the occupation fleet. It is defended by only 12 ships and has a civilian population of multiple integrated species. Are you suggesting we attack civilians? Zhang's voice was dangerously low. No, Admiral. I am suggesting we show the other integrated species that the Empire is not invincible. We destroy the defense, ships, damage the transport infrastructure enough to interrupt supplies, but leave the population intact. They will spread the news that human primitives managed to attack the heart of Imperial territory. Zhang considered the proposal carefully. It was not just a tactical matter. It was psychological. How many ships can we commit without compromising our defense here? 15 of the hybrids, plus 3 modified transport ships carrying our new gifts for the Empire. Zhang looked at the third officer present, Dr. Keiko Tanaka, head of the Unconventional Armaments Department. Doctor, are your gifts ready? Tanaka, a small woman of Japanese ancestry, smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. They are, Admiral. Computer viruses designed specifically for Imperial systems, biological weapons that attack reptilian metabolism without affecting other life forms, and small self-replicating drones that can spread through a ship and disable it from the inside out. That doesn't make us better than them, Zhang murmured. No, Admiral, it makes us more efficient. The Empire came to our system with 500 ships, ready to subjugate or exterminate us. They chose this game. We are just playing to win. 2 weeks later, the small human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. The hybrid ships, although still primitive compared to Imperial standards, possessed a critical advantage. The Imperials did not expect humans to be able to travel faster than light. Captain Torres commanded the operation from the UNS Defiance, the first fully operational hybrid ship. Her sensors showed the 12 Imperial ships in orbit around the agricultural world, completely unprepared. All ships, armaments released, targets, propulsion and communication systems. I want them trapped here, unable to call for help quickly. The attack was fast and brutal. AI-guided missiles, a technology the Imperials had underestimated in humans, found their targets with surgical precision. 3 Imperial ships were completely destroyed in the first 90 seconds. The other 9 were incapacitated, drifting in space. Phase 2. Boarding teams, you are authorized. Small boarding pods were launched from the human ships, each carrying specialized soldiers and Dr. Tanaka's gifts. They penetrated the damaged Imperial ships not to conquer them, but to infect them. Digital viruses spread through the computer systems. Biological agents were released into the ventilation systems. Microscopic drones began to reproduce in the electronic components. In 6 hours, the human fleet had returned to hyperspace, leaving behind 12 completely inoperable Imperial ships and a civilian population, shocked by the demonstration that human primitives had taken the war to the heart of the Empire. The news spread quickly. Within a month, the human fleet had attacked 7 different systems. They never stayed long enough to face Imperial reinforcements. They simply appeared, caused maximum damage to military targets, and disappeared again. In the solar system, Admiral Vextor received increasingly alarming reports. His supply chain was being strangled. His ground forces continued to suffer constant attrition. And now, the primitives had learned to travel between the stars and were attacking Imperial territory. "Request reinforcements from High Command," he finally ordered, the words burning like acid in his throat. "Inform them that the situation is deteriorating." The response arrived 3 days later. General Krathex, retired for a year but reactivated on an emergency basis, materialized his holographic image in the command center. "Admiral Vextor, High Command is concerned about developments in the Sol 3 sector. General, I need more ships, more troops. These humans are unlike any species we have ever faced." Krathex tilted his head, his ancient scales reflecting the bluish light. "I warned the Council, Admiral. I warned them about the human factor. Now the Empire faces something it never anticipated. A species that refuses to accept defeat, that learns from every encounter, and that is willing to take the war to our own territory. What does High Command order? Total containment. No Imperial ship is to enter or leave the Sol 3 system without authorization. Prepare for negotiations." Vextor felt his scales bristle with indignation. Negotiations with primitives? Primitives who have just demonstrated warp capability and galactic asymmetric warfare tactics. "Admiral, the Empire cannot allow this technology to spread, and it cannot tolerate other species seeing humans defeat Imperial forces with impunity." The transmission ended, leaving Vextor alone with his dark thoughts. Outside, in the vacuum of space, hybrid human ships patrolled the system they had already defended with blood and determination. And throughout Imperial territory, subjugated populations began to murmur a dangerous question. If human primitives could resist the Empire, why couldn't they do the same? The diplomatic vessel, UNS Concordia, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Imperial system of Tharkanis, capital of the Galactic Empire. It was a small ship, built specifically for this mission, carrying only 23 crew members and a cargo that would change the fate of entire civilizations. Admiral Rebecca Zhang stood on the command bridge, observing through the viewports the planet that had been the center of galactic power for 3,000 years. It was a red and gold world, 3 times the size of Earth, orbited by 7 artificial moons that served as defensive stations. "Admiral, we are being scanned by at least 50 defensive installations," reported the sensor officer, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka. "Counting, 243 warships in orbit. They could vaporize us effortlessly." "But they won't," Zhang replied calmly. "Because if they do, 27 nuclear devices hidden in asteroids throughout their colonial systems will be detonated simultaneously, and viruses already dormant in their computer networks will be activated." She touched the communications console. "Imperial Capital, this is Admiral Rebecca Zhang of the Unified Earth Defense Fleet. I come on an official diplomatic mission. As agreed upon in previous communication channels, I request permission to dock and an audience with the Imperial Council and Emperor Jaqir. The response came after long seconds of silence. Concordia, you are authorized to proceed to Diplomatic Station 7. Any deviation from the route will result in immediate destruction. An escort will be provided. 12 Imperial fighters materialized around the small human ship, their weapons clearly loaded but not pointed. It was a delicate balance of threat and protocol. As the Concordia navigated through the Imperial defenses, Zhang mentally reviewed the last 18 months. The war had cost humanity 6 billion lives, mostly civilians who died when the Empire bombed surface cities in the early days of the occupation. But it had also cost the Empire 123 ships, 47,000 soldiers, and something much more precious: its reputation for invincibility. The diplomatic station's hangar was immense, designed to accommodate ships of hundreds of different species. The Concordia looked insignificant, landing on a platform that could hold ships 10 times its size. Zhang maintained a neutral expression, but mentally catalogued everything: structural weak points, patrol patterns, access to critical systems. Even on a diplomatic mission, she remained a soldier. The Imperial Council chamber was grandiose, a vaulted ceiling that displayed star holograms, a semicircle of elevated seats where 20 counselors from the Empire's most important species awaited, and in the center, raised above all, the throne of Emperor Jaqir. The Emperor was impressive, even by reptilian standards. 13 feet tall, black scales that seemed to absorb light, yellow eyes that glowed with ancient, dangerous intelligence. Beside him, General Krathex stood at attention, his gaze meeting Zhang's for a brief moment. "Human Admiral." Jaqir's voice echoed through the hall, universal translators processing his words in real time. "Have you come to negotiate the surrender of your species?" Zhang took a step forward, her back straight, eyes fixed on the Emperor without fear or deference. "I have come to negotiate the terms of the Imperial withdrawal from the solar system and the recognition of human sovereignty." A murmur ran through the council. Admiral Vextor, present via hologram transmitted from the solar system, hissed in indignation. "You dare to make demands of the Empire? Your species barely figured out how to leave its own system." "And yet," Zhang replied calmly, "we managed to do something no other species has achieved in 1,000 years. Take the war to the heart of Imperial territory. 7 of your colonial systems have been attacked. Your supply routes are compromised. Integrated species are beginning to question whether they truly need to submit to the Empire." She activated a portable holographic device, projecting images of Imperial worlds where subjugated populations were beginning to protest, inspired by the human example. "You can destroy Earth. You have the firepower to vitrify our entire planet. But we implemented what we call the Samson Protocol. If Earth falls, 27 of your most important worlds will face simultaneous sabotage. Viruses already dormant in your networks will be activated, paralyzing critical infrastructure. Biological weapons we created specifically for reptilian species will be released." The silence in the hall was absolute. Zhang continued, her voice firm and devoid of emotion. "We do not want to destroy the Empire, but we will, if necessary, mutually assured destruction. You taught us that the galaxy operates under the logic of power. Very well. Now you face a species that is willing to use that power without hesitation." Emperor Jaqir remained motionless for long seconds. Then he rose from his throne descending the steps until he was only a few feet from Zhang. The size difference was absurd, but the human did not back down. Do you understand that you are threatening billions of innocent lives? That your biological weapons would not distinguish between soldiers and civilians? Just like your orbital bombardments didn't discriminate when they struck our cities. Zhang replied, 6 billion humans died in the first days of your invasion, Emperor. Half our planet's population. You came to our system offering sovereignty or extinction. We are simply returning the favor. Krathek stepped forward, his ancient scales reflecting the hall's light. Your Majesty, if I may speak. Jakir gestured permission. Admiral Zhang is being completely honest about their capabilities. Our analysts confirmed that humans managed to infiltrate agents into our colonial systems. The viruses she mentions were detected, but we cannot guarantee we found them all. And the biological weapons, humans have 10,000 years of experience, creating increasingly efficient ways to kill each other. They can deliver on their threats. He looked directly at Zhang. But I also believe the Admiral does not desire this outcome. Humans value life, even the lives of their enemies. It is a cultural weakness of theirs. Zhang allowed herself a small, bitter smile. It's not weakness, General, it's civilization. Something the Empire forgot over its centuries of conquest. But yes, you are correct. We don't want to destroy worlds, we just want to be left alone. Ambassador David Chen stepped forward, presenting a holographic data pad. We have prepared terms for peace. They are simple: complete Imperial withdrawal from the solar system within 90 days. Recognition of Earth as independent sovereign territory. Establishment of a 10-light-year neutral zone around our system. In exchange, we will deactivate Protocol Samson, withdraw our agents from Imperial territory, and hand over information regarding the vulnerabilities we discovered in your security systems. And if we refuse, Vextor challenged through the hologram. Zhang looked directly at the Admiral's projection. Then the war continues, and I am certain other integrated species will start wondering if they can resist too. The Empire can destroy us, Admiral, but not before we inflict enough damage to destabilize your grip on dozens of systems. Do you really want to find out how many subjugated species are waiting for an opportunity to rebel? Emperor Jakir returned to his throne, his mandibles opening and closing in a thoughtful gesture. Allow us to deliberate. Admiral Zhang, you and your delegation will be accommodated in diplomatic quarters. You will have our answer in 24 hours. Zhang inclined her head, a gesture of minimal respect, and allowed herself to be escorted out of the hall. As she walked through the station corridors, she murmured low enough for only David Chen to hear. Do you think it worked? The old diplomat smiled sadly. We gave them a choice between costly peace and unthinkable war. The Empire has always chosen pragmatism over pride when the bill gets too high. Yes, I think it worked. In the shadows of the station, Imperial guards watched the small human delegation with a mixture of reluctant respect and poorly disguised fear. The galaxy was changing, and everyone could feel it. 22 hours later, Admiral Rebecca Zhang was summoned back to the Imperial Council Hall. This time, the atmosphere was different. The councillors looked tired, their postures less arrogant. Even Emperor Jakir seemed to have aged in the last few hours, his black scales appearing duller under the holographic light. General Krathek was physically present now, no longer a projection, and he spoke first. Admiral Zhang, The Imperial Council has deliberated extensively on your proposal. It was 22 hours of the most intense discussions this room has witnessed in 3 centuries. He paused, his nictitating membranes blinking slowly. The Empire accepts your terms. Zhang maintained her neutral expression, but internally felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. Beside her, Ambassador David Chen took a deep breath, the first sign of emotion he had shown since entering the room. Emperor Jaqir rose, descending the steps of his throne again. This time, there was something different in his posture. Not humility, certainly, but perhaps recognition. Understand, Admiral, that this decision does not come from weakness. The Empire possesses the resources to continue this war indefinitely. We could mobilize fleets of 1,000 ships. We could vitrify Earth and all its subterranean complexes. But not without cost, Zhang replied calmly. Exactly. And for the first time in our millennia-long history, the cost exceeds the benefit. Your species has taught us a valuable lesson, human. There are species that cannot be integrated because the price of doing so would destroy the very fabric that holds our empire together. Krathex activated a hologram showing the galactic map. Small red dots flashed across dozens of systems. Since your resistance became known, we have detected increased insurgency activity on 42 integrated worlds. Nothing we cannot contain, but it is a reminder that absolute power requires the appearance of invincibility. You shattered that appearance. Zhang looked at the map, processing the implications. So you are letting us go, not out of kindness, but out of pragmatism. Yes, the Emperor replied, without hesitation. But there is another reason. In centuries of conquest, we have never encountered a species so simultaneously self-destructive and resilient as yours. You warred among yourselves for millennia, developing weapons capable of exterminating your own kind, yet you survived. You learned from every conflict. You adapted. He tilted his massive head, studying Zhang with his penetrating yellow eyes. The Empire integrates civilizations because they need our protection, our guidance. But you humans need none of that. You would survive, adapt, and eventually prosper regardless of our interference. Forcing your integration would be like trying to domesticate an alpha predator. Possible, perhaps, but the effort is not worth the outcome. One of the counselors, an insectoid creature with an iridescent carapace, clicked its mandibles in a pattern the translators interpreted as a question. What does the Empire gain from this agreement, besides ceasing hostilities? Ambassador David Chen replied, his voice diplomatic and measured. Knowledge. We are willing to share our discoveries regarding asymmetric warfare tactics, reverse engineering of captured technology, and the methods we developed for surviving hostile environments. In exchange, we would like access to Imperial scientific databases unrelated to military technology. Cultural exchange? Another counselor asked, surprised. Why not? The war is over, but that does not mean our species cannot learn from one another, provided it is a voluntary and respectful exchange. Admiral Vextor, still present via hologram from the solar system, finally spoke, his voice carrying a mixture of reluctant respect and bitterness. Admiral Zhang, I underestimated your species. It was a mistake that cost thousands of Imperial lives, but I respect your capacity to force this outcome. Zhang looked directly at the Imperial Admiral's projection. Admiral Vextor, This war cost 6 billion human lives. Half of my people died defending our right to exist freely. There are no victors here, only survivors trying to ensure such a tragedy never happens again. The silence that followed was profound. Then, Emperor Jaqir extended one of his massive claws toward Zhang. Let it be recorded in the imperial annals. On September 27th of the Earth year 2847, the Galactic Empire formally recognizes the sovereignty of the human species and the Sol 3 system. A 10-light-year neutral zone will be established. Withdrawal of all Imperial forces will be completed within 90 Earth days. Zhang extended her considerably smaller hand, touching the Imperial claw in a gesture that thousands of species across the galaxy would watch via holographic transmission. In the name of humanity, I accept these terms and declare a cessation of hostilities. 3 months later, the last Imperial ship left the solar system. Admiral Vextor remained on the bridge of the Star Dominator, watching Earth shrink in the distance as his fleet prepared for the jump to hyperspace. Beside him, General Krathex watched in silence. You were right, General, from the very beginning. I wish I hadn't been Admiral. Many lives could have been spared had the Council heeded my warning. Vextor looked out at the stars, processing lessons that had cost far too much. Do you think they will leave the Empire alone now? Krathex considered the question carefully. As long as we leave them alone, yes. Humans do not seek conquest. They seek survival and freedom. But if we ever decide we need to control them again... He paused. Well, I believe the entire galaxy will learn why cornered predators are the most dangerous. On Earth, reconstruction had begun. Devastated cities were being razed again. Subterranean complexes were slowly being deactivated as the population returned to the surface. 6 billion graves marked the cost of freedom. Admiral Rebecca Zhang stood in one of those cemeteries, an immense field where black crystals marked every lost life. She placed flowers at the foot of a specific crystal, engraved with the name Commander Jack Miller, ISS Pathfinder. You'll never know we won, Jack, she murmured, but your resistance on that small damaged ship started it all. It showed the Empire that humans don't surrender, no matter the odds. Behind her, Engineer Sarah Chen approached, leaning on a cane. The wounds of 18 months of war had not fully healed. The hybrid ships are being decommissioned, she reported. But we kept all the data, if we ever need to rebuild them. I hope we never do, Zhang replied. But yes, keep everything archived and make sure the next generation knows what our freedom cost. In human military academies, a new discipline was being taught: interplanetary defense. Young cadets studied the tactics that had allowed humanity to resist a technologically superior force. But they also studied the costs, the lives lost, the trauma of a war that nearly wiped out the species. At the Unified Earth Security Council, representatives from all nations debated the future. We now have access to warp drive technology, argued a Chinese delegate. We could explore the galaxy, establish colonies in distant systems, and risk another conflict, countered a Brazilian delegate. We barely survived this one. We should focus on strengthening our defenses, not aggressive expansion. The Secretary General, an elderly man who had served as a medic during the occupation, raised his hands for silence. Humanity is at a crossroads. We can close ourselves off, live in fear of another attack, or we can learn, grow, and ensure we are prepared not through isolation, but through strength informed by wisdom. He's activated a hologram showing the galaxy. The Empire left us alone not out of kindness, but because we made the cost of conquering us prohibitive. Our best defense is to continue being a species nobody wants to attack. And that means investing in science, diplomacy, and yes, military capability. But always remembering that war is the last option, not the first. Years passed. The solar system prospered. Colonies on Mars and Jupiter's moons grew. Commercial space stations were established, and slowly, very cautiously, human exploration vessels began venturing beyond the neutral zone. They encountered other species, some integrated into the Empire, others living independently. And invariably, the story of human resistance had already arrived there first, transmitted through trade networks, spread by species who dreamed of their own freedom. At a trading post on the edge of Imperial territory, a young human explorer, Marcus Rivera Jr., the son of the commander who had helped steal Imperial technology, sat in a bar sharing stories with merchants from a dozen different species. An avian creature, iridescent blue feathers, leaned in curiously. "Is it true your species forced the Empire to retreat using only primitive technology?" Marcus smiled, taking a sip of his drink. It wasn't just the tech. It was the refusal to quit. Every human who fought knew the odds were stacked against us. But we also knew that freedom is worth more than security under subjugation. He looked at the stars, visible through the transparent window of the post. The Empire is strong, vast, ancient. But we humans have something they will never fully understand: the ability to look at an impossible situation and decide to try anyway, not because we think we're going to win, but because we refuse to lose without a fight. The avian creature flapped its wings in a gesture that signified understanding among its species. Your history inspires many of us. Perhaps one day, we too will find that courage. "I hope you never have to," Marcus replied honestly. "But if you do, you'll know where to find allies." In the heart of the Empire, General Krathex, now fully retired, recorded his memoirs into a database for future Imperial officers. "I learned many lessons serving the Empire," he dictated, his ancient scales reflecting the soft light of his retreat. "But the most important came from a primitive species that refused to accept the inevitable. Humans are not the strongest. They are not the smartest. They do not possess the most advanced technology." He paused, remembering Commander Jack Miller fighting until his last breath. "But they possess something that makes all the difference: the absolute refusal to accept subjugation. Other future commanders will learn this lesson the hard way, just as I did, or they will learn it now, reading these words." His nictitating membranes blinked slowly. There are species that can be integrated, and there are species that must be respected. Humanity firmly belongs in the second category, and the galaxy is better for it. End of story. If humanity's tenacity and Admiral Zhang's journey inspired you, keep following the Chronicles of the Galactic Frontier. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about species that defy the impossible, explore the unknown, and prove that true strength comes not just from advanced technology, but from the unbreakable will to remain free. Because in the vast cosmos, some species are conquered by force, but others, like humanity, simply refuse to surrender.